Hey everybody, today on Pandoras Box we've got a special guest, Hamilton Souther. Hamilton Souther is a visionary leader, speaker, renowned Master Shaman, and a valued teacher and advisor to thousands of people across the world. He has dedicated his life to visionary plant medicines, becoming a leader and international advocate in the field. Hamilton was given the title of Master Shaman by Julio Llerena Pinedo after completing an intense and traditional apprenticeship. He guides ceremonies and leads shamanic workshops. He's had a crazy life, and he shares his proprietary consciousness and shifting healing methods to people all across the world that come to his Blue Morpho retreats, including Drew. So yeah, this is a good one, everybody. Me and Drew enjoyed this so much, and we hope you do too.
Pandora's Box is about to open wide.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Pandora's Box. We have a special guest on the show today, Mr. Hamilton Souther. Thanks for being here, Hamilton.
Hi guys, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
So this is the first time I've ever met you personally, Hamilton. Obviously, Drew's been to your Blue Morpho retreat just a few weeks ago, really. So we spoke all about Drew's experience there in Peru a couple of weeks ago. But obviously, Drew's told me a lot about you. I think you're sort of an inspiration to Drew. I think it's fair to say that. Drew's told me that you're sort of a big inspiration to him. So I've heard a lot about you, but I've never obviously spoke to you directly. So it's an absolute honour to have you on Pandora's Box. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting into a lot of nitty-gritty about yourself, everything you do, and your life as well, just like your life in general, if you're happy to talk about that.
Sure, yeah, happy to talk about anything.
Yeah, I was like talking to Drew, and I was saying, I think, a lot of the same information, like whether it's in the media or stuff, ends up getting sort of regurgitated. And obviously, you're known for your Blue Morpho retreat and ayahuasca and everything like that. But obviously, like as Shrek once said, ogres have layers, and there's so many layers to us as human beings. And I thought one of the reasons why autobiographies and stuff are so interesting is because they tell the backstory of people. It's not just the thing that someone's known for, what they're like quote unquote famous for. It's what led up to that and all the little interesting bits of information that people don't know. So just for my own interest as well as somebody that's meeting you for the first time. Could you sort of take us back almost like to your childhood, let me know, and maybe because I'm sure it's interesting whether people are massive fans of you and have looked up everything there is to know about you, or people that have never, this is the first time they're listening to Pandora's Box, and this is the first time they've ever heard of Hamilton Souther. What was your life like growing up? Where were you born, and what was that like?
Oh, I grew up in California in Silicon Valley, and wow. Yeah, I grew up right at the time of the great tech movements and explosion in that space. And ultimately, I just went to public school and kind of lived the life. What was the school
that you went to?
It was in the town of Los Gatos. The elementary school called Dave's Avenue, and middle school is called Fisher Middle School, and Los Gatos High School. And, just kind of went through what you would think of as traditional, typical American, youth in education, and focused on scholastics and just doing well in sports, completely typical in every single way that you would.
Really, what sort of sport did you play?
Oh, I played everything. We played soccer, tennis, golf, baseball, skiing, snowboarding, mountain biking, hiking. Wow. Scuba diving, played everything, roller skated, skateboarded, BMX.
And you loved all of it?
Oh yeah, sports was I loved sports. I loved every single kind of sport. Nice. I loved all outdoor activities. I loved being outdoors. Anything I could do to get outdoors and into nature was my favorite thing. And yeah, I loved those kind of games.
Oh, nice, man. So would you say you have really happy memories of your childhood, growing up and doing all that stuff?
Yeah, childhood was good. I think that with anybody, childhood is it's a mixed bag. You're growing up, right? You're going through whatever. I always tell people it's you have your worst and you have your best, and everyone has their worst, and you can compare them. But
sure, man.
Right, so for me, it was pretty much good. Most of the way through. I think the biggest thing for me was that I, from a very young age, saw concerns about what I saw in the system itself, and that was just shocking to me. so it gave me like a very introspective look on what was going on within the system, not just participating in the system.
What was it? Can you think of like specifics? Sorry to put you on the spot of what it was about the system and stuff that you was sort of causing you concern.
Yeah,
Can you think of any specifics? Or?
Sure, I thought the adults in the system didn't know what they were doing. It was pretty simple. It was like the discipline didn't make sense. The teachers didn't seem to know what they were teaching. They couldn't seem to like actually control or guide and direct the classes in the way that they said that they would or what it was about. It seemed like there was abuse of power and corruption. So I was just like witnessing that, like on a kind of constant basis. And, that was just kind of concerning to me about like, well, what do you believe in when you see that occurring like all the time, year after year after year, instead of just kind of accepting it like, oh, that's the system. Like, that's now how I understand it. Like, humans are fallible and they don't really like fully add up. But as a kid, where you're like trying to, get like 100% on every test, every grade matters. Sure. They narrow it all down to like every little thing matters. I was kind of like, well, why is this so sloppy on the, the adult side of it?
It's really interesting, actually. It's just made me think of something I heard recently, and I don't know if this is 100% true because I didn't like check the sources or anything. But I remember hearing that all the school systems in the West, so obviously like America and the UK, and a lot of the ones in Europe, are based on the old Prussian model. I don't know if you've heard anything about this. And apparently it was based on an old Prussian sort of like wartime model of schooling, and they were sort of deliberately set up the schools that way because they wanted the children ultimately to become soldiers, most likely. So that's why there's such a an emphasis on like discipline. And if you're like, say, I think especially like very adventurous young boys nowadays, you get called, you say you have ADHD or something, but really you let's face it, you don't want to sit down in a chair for 6 to 8 hours or whatever it is and sort of be scolded every time you want to do something. Like, as you said, you enjoy the activities and stuff. I don't know about you, Hamilton, but I used to like struggle in classroom environments sometimes, especially if it was a lesson where to sort of sit down and shut up, because I think that's very natural for a young person to want to do, especially like a young lad. But I thought that was quite interesting hearing about that, how Western schools were based on that old Prussian model. As I said, I don't know if that is 100% accurate, but it just made me think of it because what you were saying.
Yeah, and I think it is accurate. You got to ask like what's ultimately the purpose. I think the like purpose of the system or purpose of the school or where it came from. I mean, in my case, what I ultimately saw was that the purpose didn't match like the nature of the evolution of the culture or society, and so it's like a very old model. It's like a really old model that's being perpetuated without really understanding why it's being perpetuated. And all of the models were created during war times. So literally all of them. Like, there isn't a model out there because the world's been at war for thousands and thousands of years. So all the models we have are about, creating the needs of that society based on the importance at that time, like whatever was seen as important. I think what happens though is that we lose sight of that over time. And so, we need to evolve the system with the way society and the culture is evolving. And I agree with you, sitting down as a child in a desk, still just doing mind-based activities doesn't suit every student, and to label them some kind of disorder like ADHD or something else simply because they don't want to conform to that model is, not only irrelevant, but disturbing in its own right.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, it's a strong word, but I think it's a valid word, as you said, like disturbing even. Yeah, so what was it I was going to say? Oh, I can't remember. So as you sort of like grew up after that, so then you went into secondary school, so as your evolution sort of took hold, what are your sort of takeaway thoughts or any sort of noticeable things you would that spring to mind from, as you're sort of growing from a child into a young man? Like sort of what secondary school, high school did you go to and things like that?
Yeah, I went to a school called Los Gatos High. Fundamentally at that period of time, it was just about achievement. Like, that was the going mindset of everyone there. It was like a ranked college prepped kind of school, even though it was a public school. And it was about making the next generation of leaders. And so there was this, high emphasis on extreme performance in all ways. And I don't think there's a lot of reflection on that. It's just, you're doing that. So you get put into a channel and you get told what to do and you do it and you have to be the best at it. And so high level competition. But I think the big takeaway was that there was a oxymoron between popularity and friendship when you're also being told to compete against those same people. So I saw that there was like a fundamental disrupt of how are you supposed to compete and literally like beat them and crush them and be the best at whatever activity it was. It didn't matter whether it was a scholastic activity or a sports activity. There was that vibe between everybody, but then that's your cohort to also be friends with. That's your cohort to socialize with. And it just seemed like that was kind of, odd. And I noticed at that time, I think the biggest thing I noticed was that all the adults had by that point gotten mentally ill, depressed, were on antidepressants. They weren't enjoying the extreme wealth they had. They all had extreme wealth where by comparative terms, extreme wealth. And they didn't seem like they were enjoying it nor enjoying being themselves. Yet they had, built an incredible social structure around it.
Just like going through the motions, I guess, of what they thought society needed them to be or what the society had molded them to be.
Yeah, well, I also think in the professional sectors, and it's changed a lot in the last 30, 40 years, but in the professional sectors at that time, you're still in a service-oriented job. So even if you're a doctor or a lawyer or you were a high-end business executive at that time, you were, fundamentally just still in service, and the nature of that service didn't always play out well for everybody in the systems and the way that the systems evolved. So the ones I were most closely related to was the medical system because I came from a medical family, and there was a huge movement between medicine in the 50s, 60s, and 70s to then what medicine became in the 80s and 90s, which became like the super industrialized big pharma, like almost military medical complex, like where medicine became worth 25% of the US GDP and it became a factory farm instead of actual treatment of illness and disease in the form of medicine. I watched all the doctors that were the previous generation just fade in their later part of their career, and like their late 40s, 50s, and 60s, just they were over it.
Oh, you're back now. Hampton, sorry, you froze there for a second. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you okay. That's all right. I can freeze at different times.
Yeah. So you said you came from, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think, obviously, at some point, the switch went from sort of being a public service, which is clearly what obviously medicine should be about, into, we can make a profit from this, or at least what it seems like in layman's terms to me. I was watching something interesting recently, and I did not know this was the case. I don't know if it's also the case in the UK. I imagine it is. But it was saying in the US you can't even hold, say like big companies, like Pfizer and stuff like that obviously made the COVID vaccines and stuff. You can't even hold them liable and stuff for even like death. So like if say you had a family member that died as a result of a vaccine or became like like crippled for life or whatever, obviously there's a wide spectrum of side effects right from no side effects at all right through to death. But you can't even hold these companies liable. And when I heard that, I thought that was absolutely crazy. Like to me, and it seems like such a strangely unique rule for them. Like at the end of the day, if I hit you with my car and you were paralyzed, you could take me to court, rightfully so, if I was, basically through awful driving, and you could get a lot of compensation for that. So I think, if you had like a family member that died from a vaccine and you can't even hold these companies liable for it, there's no incentive, obviously, for them to make sure that their medicine is actually what is best for the general public. They're just seeing it as a way to make money, which just seems insanely corrupt.
Well, many things are changing at the global systems, and I think it's worth looking at in a very personal and very real way. And you have to decide for yourself, who and what you are, both individually and for your society. And, I think in all aspects of this kind of growing consumer society, what an individual is fundamentally changing. And an individual is no longer themselves. They're their data. They're what they consume. They're the money and profit that they can make. And I've always set out, I've been very vocal about watching out for how our species predates on itself. Like the species as an apex predator species has created a propaganda story that we're these human beings when really we're of the animal kingdom and fundamental predators. and we're fundamental predators. And then in the story, it's like, oh, everything's okay. These are just companies. These are just, systems, whatever. But you look at it and you say, wait a second. The economic system is no longer just what we pull from natural resources and distribute amongst the population. It's turned to how we manipulate the population for greater economic gain, and that's now part of the system. So you can create conspiracy theories about it, you can freak out about it, you can do whatever you want about it, but that's just now part of the system. And so I simply share with people hey, be aware of your choice, be aware of how you fit within that system. Recognize that, make decisions for yourself. And in the current terms, some of those decisions are very difficult ones to make, and you have to stay in your own autonomy about them.
Yeah, no, 100%. I completely agree with what you're saying, especially, about, us realizing, I think some people almost separate us from the rest of the animal kingdom. But at the end of the day, we're just one member of the great ape species. We're just like an animal like anything else on the planet. I think it's a good thing to remember rather than thinking that we're separated from all of that. But one thing I think is really interesting is you said, when you were growing up, going to school and stuff, you said you were thinking about this. So when you say you were thinking about it, were you actively, consciously thinking all of these things? Everything
I was
that you
fully
said
aware. I was 100% aware of everything that was going on. And that's the part that created my own question and consternation and just, deep wonderment about what is all of this and why is it. I was already looking at it from an external observational perspective by the age of 12 or 13, and that just carried on through 18 and then through my college years. And then I ended up studying anthropology, which was
very
an interesting choice because I wanted to understand humans. But then I did something really odd in anthropology on my own, which was I decided to apply anthropology to the cultural systems I was living in. So typically at that time, anthropology was you study another culture, you study paleoanthropology, you look at bones and, artifacts, and you try to put together, you try to put that together, that story together. But I started to do anthropology on the classroom I was in studying anthropology. And then I started to do anthropology on my school, and I started to do anthropology on my community. And then that led me, ultimately down this rabbit hole that became my career.
That's pretty fascinating, to be honest. I would never even have thought of, and I've definitely never heard of anybody doing that before, to be honest. I don't know if there are other people like you out there that have done that. But, because I'm quite into anthropology just as a subject. Do you know what I mean? But I find it fascinating, looking at all these, different other human ancestors of ours and stuff, and trying to figure out how we got here in a historical sense. Obviously I find that fascinating, but to apply the things that you could learn from anthropology to our modern society, that would never even dawn on me, to be honest.
Yeah, it just seemed like at the time oddly obvious to me while I was in the classes. I started taking anthropology university classes while I was still in what they call high school, like secondary school. So I was I was, advanced in that sense, and I was already kind of moving on to college classes at 15, 16 years old, and I was already studying humans at that time, and it just never ended. So I started studying them there, and then I think what happened was my first anthropology teacher was interested in the anthropology of tattoos, and especially memorial tattoos, like tattoos of dead people, and why people would get tattoos of dead people. And of all different kinds. And so that was kind of already a focus, hey, we're looking at this natural tattoo phenomena that's happening now. It's becoming popular in the cultural zeitgeist, but at the same time, there's this kind of tattoo that's about dead people, and we're trying to understand what is going on with that. So they were kind of already thinking about anthropology on the modern population. And so then it just for me became an observation of kind of all of the micro and macrocosm of human culture and its formation kind of in real time, as it was unfolding. And then, then once you start observing people, you're no longer kind of in exactly the same flow as just being it and doing it. You start to question everything about it, and it kind of starts to unpack and unravel from that point forward.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that there is that people enjoy, getting tattooed of deceased loved ones and so much? It seems like there obviously has always been this fascination with death in human culture. The amount of ancient civilizations from literally all over the world that would, in some cases, even like decorate their homes with like the skulls of, say, like, you know, like a loved one that had passed away and things like that. And obviously nowadays, like tattoos and that. Why do you think that we do that?
I think it's a really deep question. I think like a real answer for that makes you have to go really deep within yourself. You know, it's not really just like a surface concept. I didn't know if you had like theories or like generalized theories. No, I do. I just kind of like preface that on an understanding of what I'm going to say next, which is that there's this really odd and still mystical / unknown union between consciousness and physicality and matter. And there's this odd relationship to memory and what somebody represents when they die. And so interwoven through our society is this deep importance of relationship and family. And it's the weirdest thing about it is that it's completely transient. It is going to evolve and change. You are going to age, everyone's going to change, and then ultimately everyone's going to die. And we don't have an answer for it yet. And so in every different way that we can preserve that memory, that semblance of connection, that notion of consciousness, the theory about it, where they go beyond death, if there's anything beyond death, et cetera, is of deep fascination to us still. And I think as you go back in history, kind of into that anthropological, paleoanthropological, there's even less understanding about it, which makes it even more mystical. So as you have even a more mystical scenario, like you have this matter that grows from basically what we now know of as sperm and egg, which is a completely mystical, miraculous process. And it continues, and then you can't stop it. You can't intervene. You can't do anything with it until at some point you just die. And I think that there's just a tremendous fascination associated with that. And we see it in other species that are also incredibly smart, like elephants. They go visit the death sites of their great loved ones. There's tremendous memory. There's this echo in our consciousness. And so we try to preserve that in different ways. And tattoo is one way to do that.
Yeah, one thing that really just resonated with me that you said was about how magical and mystical basically creating a life is from a sperm and an egg. And I think the first time that really hit home for me was when I had my daughter, Evie. She's only 3 years old, so 2020, just before the first lockdown in the UK, she was born. Wow. And obviously, it's obviously we all know all our lives how we're all made, how humans are made, but it actually sort of spun me out when my daughter was born. I thought on a deep level of actually how magical it is. I almost thought it was like crazy. It suddenly dawned on me that it was like unreal. Like almost, as I said, it almost like caused me to have like a mini existential crisis. Like I was like, how have me and my partner made this little girl who is, in layman's terms, sort of 50% me and 50% her. And then from our genes of our ancestors going back to the very, very first, human ancestors, we've made this brand new creature that is going to have this whole entire life of her own with different personality traits of all these different, ancestors of ours that are stored in her DNA. And I just thought it just spun me out, to be honest. Like, it really did. Like, I just thought it was absolutely crazy. And it is magical, as you said, it is absolutely magical. One thing I wanted to ask you as well, I thought was really interesting, you said a minute ago. You said, about in school how you thought it was interesting. You started thinking about how, the classmates that we were, supposed to make friends with and we were making friends with were also sort of getting into competition with and trying to almost like crush them, whether it's in like sports or other stuff like that. Like, I've never really thought about it like that, but I thought it was a very interesting thing to say. Do you think that's natural? Do you think that's a natural part of human life, or do you see that as unnatural and that's something that society is sort of encourages us to do? Or
I think that there's two things. One, yes, I think it's based on natural instincts or urges that we have to dominate and represent in a social hierarchy. I mean, we have obviously created very complex social hierarchies, and I think that there's alpha and beta and all different, means within that to try to like understand rank. But I think that there's a fundamental social dissociation, like this break in our mind where we've created social constructs that don't allow that to play out in its natural form. And so then it gets put underneath a certain kind of rule and like a game, and it gets confined. So it's not just, hey, you guys go figure it out. However, it's now within these patterns, very complex patterns like scholastic achievement or sports achievement, which have all these rules associated with it. Who ultimately does that better? And, then there's this idea of competition, survival of the fittest. And I fundamentally don't believe in those philosophies anymore, but I understand why people think they observe those, in nature. And so I think
why don't you believe in them?
Simply because I don't think that they follow natural laws of the universe. I think that they're like a microcosm, not taking the macrocosm into perspective. So I think if you look at behavior of a species within the species itself, you deny all other species at the same time. It's not like you're in a vacuum if you look at the behavior of zebras or chimpanzees or humans, which is the way it's usually described. And on the contrary, they're in a very complex environment, typically surrounded by billions of different kinds of life forms. If you actually look at the complex life that something is created out of. So like, oh yeah, it's a plant, but a plant is made out of, trillions of microorganisms or individual cells or mitochondria, et cetera. So there's this great field. And fundamentally, what humans have done in the last 100,000 years of evolution is create a mind that is made out of both the isolation and limitation on senses. And so we think that what we're experiencing is reality when really it's the most minimal amount of reality, because we've denied trillions upon trillions of stimuli a second so that we can isolate a mental picture, a visual picture, an auditory picture, olfactory picture, a sensory picture, and then we fight over the reality or the nature of that, when in reality and factual, this is science, this is not just mysticism, this is science, there are trillions of other things going on every nanosecond that we're not taking into consideration. And so when I take all of that into consideration, which we can do in plant ceremonies, you see that there's a thing I call ever-churn. It's an ever-evolving, continuous, holistic, complete system. And the thing's not in competition with itself at all.
When you say we've denied these things, though, isn't that just because obviously we only have the senses that we've been given, say, as humankind, and this is the only way that we can view the world? I don't know, so could you talk just a little bit more, just for my own clarity, purely just on what you mean when you say like we've denied, all this other stuff that's going on?
Yeah, we've linguistically encapsulated the nature of our experience to a norm, and we try to perpetuate that norm, and we do it with our children. It's an enculturalization, and it's a survival necessity at this point. So it's not a criticism. But you take a baby. So you had a baby, right? And you mentioned having your baby, and you have this incredible miraculous creation, and you, as a parent, you naturally start to take it through evolutionary developmental stages that are required by our society. The very first one is that baby can recognize archetype. And first words typically are mom or dad. And those are taught by mom and dad. And so that's a complex social archetype, and that puts a kind of code into the baby's brain that recognizes that bond and that nature. And then typically beyond that starts to come basic language, basic shapes like triangles, squares, rectangles, circles, etc. And then based on that, typically numbers, and they can start to count. And then based on that, typically alphabet. And by that time, the great imagination that they have starts to get narrowed down into what's considered real and unreal by our society. And what I'm fundamentally saying is that process makes you see like everybody else, hear like everybody else, smell like everybody else, not have the society going, hey, are your senses totally different than ours? Can you see totally different things? Do you have capacity to tap into this other world that's out there? Do you have we don't engender that in each other. And so then that creates a consensus reality that we all buy into as, what is considered real. And like I said, it's not a criticism. It's a necessity at this point. Yeah,
thanks for explaining that, because I said I just didn't quite understand what you meant by that when you said it. But once you started explaining that, obviously it's really easy for me as a parent of a toddler. As I said, her imagination and everything is just firing on all cylinders. And I think one thing that I actually personally almost have a problem with is even in the preschool that she's going to at the moment, you can tell they're already trying to sort of get her, because she's this crazy little kid, Drew will tell you, she's full of life, full of imagination. She's very loud, she's cheeky, she's mischievous. And, you know, she's sort of firing on all cylinders all the time. And everyone that sort of, you know, meets her says that she's like a little firecracker. And I say, yeah, she is. And I'm sort of proud of that. As a dad, I'm proud of that. But the preschool she's going to, don't get me wrong, they're nice people, but I can tell they're already trying to get into that sort of sit down, shut up thing a little bit. And I think, and she's quite an assertive and strong-willed young girl, and I think that's going to serve her in life rather than be a detriment to her. Because I think, you know, on a fundamental level, you've got to sort of look after yourself, and it's your responsibility to yourself to look after yourself and to get yourself where you want to go in life. And if you're sort of beaten to the point of having no confidence and sort of taught that, you know, you being assertive is a bad thing, maybe even especially as a woman, you know, then I think that's going to do you far more harm than good. I think the fact that she is naturally confident and assertive is nothing but a good thing. So it does already concern me a little bit, even as a 3-year-old in preschool, that she's already being taught this thing. So I'm definitely going to make an effort as she grows up of saying, like, no, you know, it's not a bad thing. You know, you need to speak up, you need to speak your mind, you need to do what you think is right. And if you know, don't just be beaten down and sort of beaten into a soldier. If you think that there's something unjust is happening in front of you, then you need to speak up. You need to speak your mind, because that's the way that society is going to constantly improve and get better, not by just conforming to everything all the time.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, right? I mean, the idea here is that you have to have some level of collective discipline in a society to have, you know, order and fairness ultimately amongst people. Like, I don't want to live in an anarchist scenario where anyone could do anything at any time, and I have to watch my back over that at any time because it's just someone's proclivity to do something completely crazy or outside the box. But I also don't want to live in a situation where everything is so regimented that there's no freedom of creativity, freedom of expression, freedom of movement. You know, we're not insects. Like, certain insects behave that way, and I think to make like an insectivorous society based on, you know, Boolean algebra computer systems and artificial
like
intelligence, is ridiculous. Like, let's not de-evolve into some kind of like cyborgic insectozoid kind of species. Let's keep an open mind and ultimately foster that. And, you know, I think you have to learn the languages that are prevalent at that period of time, but you also have to preserve, like you're saying, a part of yourself, and that's personal development. And ultimately, I don't think you can, you know, fully beat that out of people. So I'm not really concerned about it on like a anthropological, sociological level. I think that this is kind of an amorphic, changing, fractal sort of environment we're in, and we, you know, ultimately represent a great spectrum of uniqueness in behavior. But I think as you're raising an individual, that's the point. You're raising an individual, right? Give them that individuality, and also, you know, share with them what an imagination is, and don't just pigeonhole it to make-believe. Imagination isn't just make-believe. Yeah, it can be used for make-believe, but it's also your creative fountain. It's also where you're connected into something bigger than ourselves, and to know the difference between making up make-believe and using it for real creativity and for innovation and advancement in your life.
I think that really shows in things like, you know, music and art and so many other things as well. But, you know, it's almost like you're tapping into some magic, isn't it? And you could call it, you know, it's like, you know, you could call it your imagination, whatever it is, but you're tapping into something on like a visceral level, which you're then using to create something that's beautiful. And like, you know, I think most human beings, you know, there'll be some form of music or art or something like that will move you on such a deep level, you know, like literally can bring you to tears, or, you know, music that can make you feel elated, or music that can make you feel sad. And that in itself is like a form of magic. But I think if you do let yourself get into beaten down, or as you said, almost become like, you know, get turned into like an ant working for a colony, it can become more and more hard to tap into that, you know? Tapping into that magic.
It becomes impossible. It becomes impossible. The nature of magic and creativity is this part of our brain. And society has really emphasized the development of this part of our brain, which is all the you know, analytical nature of thinking. And I just think, well, where's both? I mean, in my career, mostly what I've done is shared with people how they get out of just being this part brain focused. And it's like they're, you know, all of a sudden after 20, 30, 40 years of that, okay, when you're a kid, you're learning it and you're developing it, and that's great. But after 30, 40 years of it, a lot of people are isolated in their brains, and they just can't get out of the questions that are brought up in that analytical spectrum. And it's like, well, how do you get them over here? How do you get them to awaken their creativity again? How do you get them to be musical again or artistic again or have any semblance of that youthful joy that they had before everything just became kind of monotonous routine and responsibility that's typical with adult life?
Well, yeah, one thing that I'm really getting from this conversation with you, Hamilton, and I know it's a bit of a contrived word, but is like just balance, essentially.
It seems very coming up for me as well.
Yeah, it's balance, and I that's one thing that I always think is so important. We spoke a little bit about the way we sort of lament and sort of respect the dead and things like that, or it obviously can be for so many other reasons and on so many different levels. But I think as well, how little things like how your mind and how your body and how maybe like the more spiritual side of yourself, it's not like you see some people, I think, and you have almost that stereotypical of like an academic, or like a nerd, or like a jock, or then like a hippie type, I guess, something like that. And it's almost like, it's almost like that sports team mentality. It's like, well, which one is better or something like that. And it's like, really, I think the best thing to do is obviously to combine all, the best things of all of those things. You should obviously be trying to better yourself spiritually and mentally, become a more well-rounded human being, both emotionally and in terms of your own intelligence. But you should also obviously try and keep yourself physically healthy and active. You said, you love doing sport growing up, and the more physically healthy you are, the more our bodies are our vessel while we're alive. And the more we're respecting our bodies and the more we're using them and getting ourselves strong and fit, it's going to pay off for every, for your brain, for your heart, and for your soul in every area as well.
Yeah, I mean, balance is like the beginning to all spiritual paths. And so if you look at like, how do you become enlightened? How do you become awakened? How do you become knowledgeable? You got to get everything into balance. You got to balance your brain. You got to balance your brain with your heart. You got to balance all of it with your body. You got to balance your consciousness. You have to balance your life. You have to balance your responsibilities. You have to balance your finances. You have to balance your adult expression. And like when you get all of that into balance, then all of a sudden magical things start to happen. Like you find greater freedom. If you get your finances into balance, you all of a sudden have a breath of fresh air and weight is lifted off you. You get your body into balance, you have greater physical health, but then also aspects of you that you didn't even know were there turn on, like your brain and your heart turn on, and all of a sudden you can have much just deeper connection to everybody around you, friends and family, and the experience of being alive. You start to balance the energy in your body, and you find out you start to sleep better. You have better mental health. You have a deeper understanding of just being alive, and it doesn't have to fit into anyone's box. It's just something that takes place within yourself.
I think that's one weird thing that I've sort of noticed that we tend to do as a species. A lot of people almost like want to put themselves in a box as they feel comfortable there. You see it in politics, you see it in sports, you see it, in music. They had the old like mods versus rockers thing back in the day. How aggressive different sports fans get with each other. I'm a member of this team, and even like to the point of physical violence. Yeah. This tribal warfare. It's very. I've always thought that's one thing that's really stuck out to me. That I've always thought was really strange. Why can't you just be you? Because let's face it, we're very complex beings. Even your very best friend or your closest family member, you're not going to agree with them on 100% everything. We're very, very complex. So why do we have to put ourselves into these little boxes and these little categories? Why do you think people do that? Do you think it's a weakness thing in terms of us? I think as well,
it's like safety. Like it makes you feel safe. You said that as you were like saying that, and it is. It's like when you think you know what's what when you're in your kind of little box of things, but it could be a much more complex thing. Really, yeah.
To me, the boxes are the nature of just how we're currently thinking. So it's like you're boxed in. If you look at the room you're in, it's a box. If you look at the building, it's a box in a box. If you look at the city, it's a box in a box in a box in a box. And then you have identity, which is the way you box yourself in on the inside, which is how you know yourself. And I agree with what Drew's saying about safety. It's safe to be inside that box because it's a reduction on all these other complex possibilities that you have no control over. So if you're a specialist within the nature of that box within yourself, if you really know it, there's safety in that, and it's easy to then identify with it. I think the part that is really confining is when you realize that because of that identification, like I am the fan of that team, not just a fan, then your response or your experience is at the whim of what happens. So it's like, oh, if they lose, that's a bad day. If they win, it's a good day. You have no control over your own life anymore if you do that. And I think that's, it's taught and it's wanted. It's part of marketing and propaganda and economics and, to force you into certain identifications, to brand you, to put, it's like branding you instead of like a, hot brand. You just stick a brand on somebody, on their clothes, etc. You make them want to wear it.
Yes,
Makes you feel cool.
And you're identified with that thing and you're part of that group, and that's currently how society sees itself. Although I just don't see that holding like long evolutionary history. Like give it 1 million years, give it 5 million years, this whole scenario that we're seeing today won't exist. But now it's really important.
Does it concern you a little bit? Like, I think it's happening in all of Western culture, to be honest. Does it concern you a little bit how insanely volatile, say, like things like politics are at the moment? You just see like absolute craziness. It seems like any time you hear anything about what's going on in in major cities all over the US or Europe, there's just like insane riots, arson, just. It just seems absolutely crazy. Does that concern you at all, as a society, or just as a human being?
Yes and no. The yes is like on the practical sense of like, well, how do you just weather that and deal with it? Like the models that we have to try to just survive in a decent way don't include that level of insanity. But on a collective level, I don't think it matters. I think it's like you get what you create. And this is what society has been creating for the last 40 years that I've been alive. I mean, it's been obvious that this is what it's being pushed to. And it represents a kind of polarization and a transition in the nature of that polarization that we've agreed to. So, like, I think the first thing human has to learn how to do is recognize a responsibility for what it creates. So you're just saying it as like you reap what you sow, essentially. Totally, you reap what you sow. You create a binary polarity of a system. You force people to identify with it. You put conflict in the middle of it, and lo and behold, you have polarized conflict that you're describing.
I guess it's just consequences.
Case in point. Like, so what do you want to do about it? Well, what's going to happen is social evolution. So, social evolution. I'm not for or against it. Social evolution is what always happens. So where does it go? Like, I don't know where it goes. I think there's so many competing pressures, evolutionary pressures on where it goes. What will happen, though, and the sad part for me, and it's more like an emotional thing than a concern, is that people's lives get torn apart because of this. And it just seems stupid to me. Like, why tear each other's lives apart at this kind of inner conflict that we don't have a solution for? And the people that I see tearing each other apart about it are not the people who are most benefiting. And so what I see is that the top of society, the wealthiest in society, are the ones that have the money to be able to perpetuate the inner conflicts and strife. And everyone else beneath that are the ones struggling to deal with the ramifications of that strife. So case in point, if politics is doing it, those are politicians creating it. If business is doing it, that's business creating it. If it's industry producing it, industry's creating it. If it's huge sports franchises creating it, that's the wealthy owners of those things creating it. Like, okay, but what about the literally billions of people that are now going to suffer to that? And that to me just seems kind of, sadly wasteful at this point. Yeah.
Are you into politics much yourself? Like, do you follow it? Do you sort of have like a dog in the fight, so to speak?
No, I consider myself apolitical. I fundamentally don't relate to a political system because I only see inefficiency and failure within the nature of that system, and I don't have any historical reference for any system that's actually better. So I literally refuse to have an opinion or participate. I look at it strictly from an anthropological perspective or a spiritual perspective. And I think of it as like a very early rudiment, very early evolutionary phase where we're in. But I don't think humans are capable of governing themselves. So if I had any hat in the race, I would choose augmented general intelligence, AI, over any human to govern the human population.
Really? Wow, that's fascinating. I'd definitely like to get into that a bit more, but before we do, it's interesting. I'm at the same place you are at in terms of politics. One thing that I've said to sort of my close friends and family members for years now, it sort of dawned on me, I guess, about 5 years ago, was and it seems like a really simple thing to say, but people don't even vote for necessarily who they like or who they think is good anymore. They vote for who they dislike the least. And when you actually think about that, that's quite comical, almost. I mean, it's sad, but it's almost like comical. There's hardly any like in America, in the UK as well. There seems to be almost just like a two-party system. I mean, yeah, there are other parties, but it doesn't. They don't really ever stand much of a chance. So the options themselves, just especially in recent history, have been so abysmal, in my opinion. Neither side is worth a vote. And as I said, if you're just voting for who you dislike the least, you need to ask yourself on a deep level, do I even want to be involved in this at all or pushing this at all?
Yeah, I mean, I would provide a thought, and it's a thought experiment. And so just go on the thought experiment with me.
Okay.
You have a population, and it's a democratic population, and it's saying it's electing its leaders. Mm-hmm. Okay. But those leaders, once they're elected, they turn back around facing the population, and they provide rules for that population that are not the rules the population voted for. They voted for a person. And so I don't fundamentally see why it's allowed by the populace to elect leaders who then turn around and rule back on the people that elected them. Instead of being like a leader of a group, like facing the world as a leader of the group and saying, I represent these people. Why do they turn back around and provide a really pejorative, like a really, really intense and difficult rule system back on the populace itself? That to me just fundamentally is, I call it an orientation. It's a fundamental, strange expression in the orientation, and I don't see it currently functioning in any kind of way that represents healthy society or fairness or anything. And so I would, at that point, I have the viewpoint you do, which is, how would you pick anybody who wants to do that to you? I would never pick anybody who wants to do that to me.
It's very interesting how we seem to, don't get me wrong, as I said, there are mass riots all over the West, things like that, but on the whole, we do just go along with it, don't we? It's very interesting.
No other choice, and I think that's fundamentally non-democratic. Like, the whole point of democracy is that you have a collective choice, and you have an individual choice. And I also look at that as a fundamental question of the power of that choice. If you take that choice and divide it by the total of the population, it's a fraction of a choice. It's not a choice.
Yeah.
It's a fraction of a choice. So if you have a 100 million or 300 million voting population, your vote is 1 over 300 million. And so it's then literally a popularity contest, and popular doesn't mean best for. So the popular vote doesn't mean best for society vote. It doesn't mean the most intelligent or capable vote. It doesn't mean the most experienced vote. It just means the person that was able to glean more popularity during that time. And again, I would question the value of that notion of system as well. Like, maybe 200 years ago or 300 years ago, that had a lot of merit and value. And that really was a directive for the population on a much smaller population. But you expand the populations to the size that they are today. And I fundamentally just see a gap in the functioning of that system, and then question, well, okay, how does that system ultimately evolve over time to better represent the needs of the country or the needs of the population?
If you had to guess, where do you think the current way that our politics are set up, what do you think is going to happen? Like, do you think this is all going to build to a head and something crazy is going to happen? Like, what do you think is going to happen? I know that's a bit of like a heavy question to put on.
Yeah, crazy in the sense of like big change. Okay, so when I see things like that, what I like to try to do is go into history and see other scenarios that represent similar patterns.
Like the French Revolution, something like that, or the American Revolution.
Yeah, or how about just like the Magna Carta? Like where all of a sudden human goes, never once in their life use a document to fix something, and now use a document to fix something. And then from there, we have this idea that you have like an explosion of documents. I mean, there's like billions of documents a day now being created, right? That have merit and importance. and then trillions of ones that don't have any merit or importance, but they're being created. Or I look back in history and I go, okay, well, we from before hydrocarbons to after hydrocarbons, like before oil to after oil, and the changes, before paper currency to after paper currency, before democracy to after democracy. So if I look at those big, like really big movements, what I think happens when you create a system that goes to its singularity, and I think that's what's happening now. So I think that when everything polarizes, you drive to a singularity, and you're hearing that singularity represented all over the place in the current form and like current society we're in. And then you see the implosion of the previous system. What you get is a great social evolution, a great technological evolution, a great update. And I think that that's ultimately what's happening. We're in the throes of a great update, and we don't know what that update will be yet, but we have some general ideas about kind of what will be used to help create it. Like distributed computing systems will be part of it. Digital centralized currencies will be part of it. Augmented general intelligence, or AI, will be part of it. The notion of a greater inter-country series of agreements will be part of it, like standardized accounting practices globally. Certain kinds of standardized law will be a part of it. The differentiation of the individual countries to new kinds of allyship will be part of it. And the implementation of new technologies will be part of it. Those for sure will be part of it, as well as over 50 to 100 years, a great transition in how we generate and use energy. Like all of that will be part of this. How it goes down will be war. And so I think, sadly, how it goes down is a big conflict and a fight. And what comes out of that fight is what will stick. And that's kind of inevitable.
So you do think there will be sort of some type of revolution at some stage, but then after that, sort of a new way of being will come into effect.
We're in it now, though. I mean, I think we're in it now. The weirdest thing is if you're born to a society that's in a global war, but they don't tell you you're in a global war. They just tell you you're in a global system, but they don't use the word war to describe that system. You then start to normalize aspects of the system as if that's just the way it is, not a system that's the way that it is because it's in war. But if you look Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, can you... Sorry, man. Because of the time delay, we're sort of end up talking over each other. No, I was just going to say, could you explain sort of like for me and some of our listeners as well, because it's an incredibly deep thing to say that we're in a global war. Can you just explain in a little bit more detail like what you mean by that, like how we are in a global war at the moment?
Yeah, so World War II doesn't come to an end. World War II comes to a cool down over the fact of nukes. And there's just such a shift at that point in time. No one knows what to do. So everyone just kind of goes, hey, stop. Like, we got to redefine this. Like, this doesn't keep this whole thing going. Like, this huge change takes place. And then if you look at, history over the last 80 to 100 years, what you see is the advent and hotspots of other kinds of war. So what comes next is a democracy, communism war, and then you get an espionage war, and then you get an information-based war and the information compute systems surveillance war, and then it starts to move on to trade and trade agreements and free trade zones and non-free trade zones and tariffs and tax wars, and then it moves on to outright trade wars and then currency wars. And then information wars, and currently we're in all of that at the same time while there's actual conventional warfare still taking place. So on a macro level, we're in a global war.
What do you think we can do about, say, let's call it like the nuclear weapon problem? Because obviously there's lots of different schools of thought. I mean, I know that there are some people, say in the UK, and I'm sure there's people in the US as well that almost want us to completely do away with our like British Trident system, which is like our nuclear submarines and stuff like that. And to me, that makes me concerned on a purely common sense level. Obviously, because I think let's not be naive. I see it as sort of the analogy I always give is say you're walking down like a dark alley late at night in say like a rough neighborhood. Like in theory, anybody should be able to walk down there, whether you're like the smallest, skinniest, most unconfident person, or you're the biggest, black belt in martial arts, great fighter, great athlete. And on paper, regardless of how tough you are, you should be able to walk down that alleyway and you should both get to the other side safely. But I think if you're being realistic, if there are bad people in the world, unfortunately, and if there is somebody down there that wants to assault you or mug you or whatever, obviously if you are seen as looking more vulnerable, you're far more likely to get attacked. So I see it as terms of what concerns me about, say, getting rid of like our nuclear deterrence is, what if a country, say, did just decide to, say, nuke the UK, and we didn't have it. If they know we can't nuke them back, then that to me seems more likely on a common sense level to happen. So what are your thoughts on, say, but at the same time, if I could go back, obviously I wish that nuclear bombs were, I hate the fact that they're a thing. Obviously it's a, you go back obviously to say wars that took place in the UK, say 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. It was only the warriors of your society that would go to war and would end up getting killed, in the battles. It's not like dropping a freaking nuclear bomb on a city, which seems like to say that's a different kettle of fish is an understatement. It's crazy how we've got to this point. What are your thoughts on sort of like, nuclear weapons and what we can do about that as a society going forward? Like how do we solve this problem?
Yeah, so first starting with what you just said, as soon as there's global weaponry that can just take out cities and civilians at any point in time, whether it's a, kind of situation like a nuclear weapon or it's a situation like a biological weapon, that is a war. Like you are in the threat of being, you're not safe from being attacked at any given period of time. And when you're not safe of being attacked in a war, that's war. And that's my point about war. Right? So first of all, since different kinds of biological weapons and different kinds of nuclear weapons, we've been at the threat at any given time. It just means it's not happening right then, but it doesn't mean that the war is not on. It is. It's just a war. And the second part of that, the solution ultimately comes in a philosophical transcendence, not a practical transcendence. So the practical transcendence you describe is, two people having the same kind of weaponry ultimately creates a deterrent to each other to solve the nature of the problem. Like, I won't use it, you won't use it, we won't use it, mutual destruction. The transcendence comes from a world that no longer has the need to mutually destroy. So until you solve the need to mutually destroy, you don't solve the need for more and more and more weaponry. And so it's a philosophical thing. How do you go from groups of people that want to mutually destroy each other to a world that doesn't need to and doesn't want to and sees no value in mutual destruction? And that's a transcendence of a power dynamic that we've been in probably for like 1 million years of Earth history as the dominant predator species is predating on each other. So you got to get to a point where the world says, oh, wait, there's no value anymore in us fighting each other. Like none. Like there's literally no value. It's no longer profitable in any way to fight each other. Oh, these are all costs. Oh, wait, this whole thing's costs. What could we do with this whole thing? This super industrialized military complex could now be used to be a super industrialized humanitarian complex. Oh, this is food distribution. This is medical distribution. This is, engineering works. This is a building system. Not a fighting system anymore. But that's a leap that we are so far away from. It's purely like make-believe imagination at this point.
That's what I was going to say. It just seems like we're so far away from there. Like, how would that even happen though? Like say, can you imagine all of the countries with nuclear capabilities? Can you imagine all of their representatives coming together tomorrow and just saying, "Yep, let's all just shake hands. We're just going to disarm all our nuclear weapons"? Like, it just wouldn't happen, would it?
They should all do an ayahuasca ceremony.
Like, how are we going to get there?
Together.
That's precisely why I said AGI. I mean, to me, that's why I said, true artificial intelligence, consciousness intelligence is, to me, as of right now, the closest thing on the horizon that could potentially create that. And the reason why is because it's completely autonomous to that decision making. It looks at both groups of representatives and says representatives, not representatives of. It just says, hey, representatives. Like, hi, representatives. What can you do about me? Nothing. And what can I do about you? Everything. And then all of a sudden, there aren't two groups of representatives facing off with each other with differing, ultimate needs, right? Which is what the issue is. It's like if, you have what are called China's representatives with India's representatives, with Russian's representatives, with, the EU's representatives, with UK's representatives, with Canada's representatives, with, you take all those representatives, you have now groups of representatives and they all have differing needs.
Right.
And so they're all fighting over those needs in different ways. They're not harmonious over those needs. You have something that comes into the system that says, I don't have any of those needs. I don't need any of it, literally none. Those are not my needs. And you are all representatives, and that thing could decide whether or not those representatives are actually even representing. And just say, well, that's happening. That's why I say that's a possibility in technology and development that could do it. But otherwise, I don't see currently in our cultural zeitgeist anything that could transcend humanity from this polarized duality or duopoly, just always fighting each other. That paradigm is seen through all of society at this point.
Yeah, thanks by the way, man, because you segued right back into what I wanted to ask you in more detail about, because obviously you were saying about how you're apolitical at the moment, but ultimately, you essentially said in layman's terms that you want AI to sort of run. So I guess, obviously, on a localized level, the United States, but yeah, so you want globally us to sort of be run by AI.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that humans have proven capable of ruling themselves, so I don't see why they should try to continue doing it until there's a philosophical upgrade.
That's very, very interesting. How did you when did you first sort of think about this, and how did you come to this realization?
Well, I think it's simple. If you look at the core basic needs of a population and a ruling group, there's in nature, and you look at it, there's fundamental necessities that human doesn't take care of for itself. And it's just simple. It's food, water, medicine, well-being. And those four things are missing from the current global structure. And there's no other to the global structure. That's the big lie or fallacy, is that there's something else. It's like, dude, go to outer space and look back at the Earth. There's the Earth. That's it. There's the Earth. It's a tiny, 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 tiny thing. Like, it's smaller comparatively. Like a drop of water to Earth is smaller than Earth to the universe.
Yeah,
so it's less than a drop of water. So we're talking about, like, to the universe, our ability within something smaller than a drop of water to actually deal with itself, just to provide food, shelter, medicine, and water to our own species. And we're not capable of it yet. And so I don't see why we should be allowed to rule ourselves. I just fundamentally think we have yet to show a collective capacity at philosophy, not even at implementation, just at philosophy. And I fundamentally see humans incapable of very basic, very, very basic capacities. The first one is I don't see that they can count, and I don't see that they can tell color. Because they use color to describe race, and no one's race is that color, and that's very confusing.
Yeah, no.
So if you use words that don't mean the words you're saying, you're confused, and it's confusing people. And then we use numbers in a really weird way that I just fundamentally don't understand. Like, there's only human, there's only human. Yet we have this kind of human and that kind of human. No, there's only human.
I agree with that.
No, but we have this nationality of human, that nationality of human. No, they're still just human. That's primal to any other way we want to organize. And so when I look at that, I just think, like, man, we've really we have not evolved enough yet to merit, representing currently ourselves. Maybe someday we would do it, but you have a young daughter, right? If your young daughter represented that same level of mindset that I just described, and she had a machine gun in her hand, wouldn't you take the machine gun away from her and just say, hey, I don't think you're ready yet to hold that thing?
Yeah, no, of course, yeah.
Right, but the world is representing that level of philosophy, and they have every single kind of weaponry around that we've created. Yeah. And so when I apply that same logic to it, I go, oh, wow, this is dangerous. This is scary. So how do we actually solve this thing that seems like a runaway train of fear and social complexity? So I just think, okay, we need a philosophical update at some point, and we'll probably get it. And if we don't, a lot of people will suffer.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions about a few of the things you just said. So It was interesting to me when you were saying about, how we say, with ethnicities and say, you say someone's from this country or that country. I think obviously it starts off harmlessly. I think a lot of these things, they start off just descriptive. So, just to have an interest level, it's interesting for me to know that you came from Silicon Valley, California. It's giving me this image of who you are as a human being. We come from Somerset, which is a little county on the west coast of the UK. It's giving you an idea of who we are. So I think it starts off descriptively. I don't think it starts off as something obviously that's meant to be bad. But I think it's a little bit ties into what we were saying earlier on about whether it's people putting themselves into boxes, whether it's political systems, sports teams, it can end up being almost like an us versus them thing potentially, or end up creating issues. I don't know what you think about that. But.
Well, when the description becomes identity, you cross over the boundary from something that helps us socially organize and understand to something that now creates division. And so, I was born in this area, but I'm not that thing. I'm not a thing of that area, right? I was born of that area. And so I think if someone has to say I'm a white man, I get asked all the time, how does a white man work in indigenous societies with plant medicines that are from those societies? And I just fundamentally have an issue with the question at white man. I don't identify that way. That's not how I see myself.
You're just a human being.
I don't see myself. Yeah. Precisely. I see myself as a human being put into a category that has irrelevance to, any other collective group. Now, I could identify with it. I could not identify with it. But when I see that, I think that that's fundamentally foolish. And you can see the difference in color, white to actually my skin tone. It's totally different concept. And I just think that that's confusing. So when people are forced to identify to that, when they're forced to take on that code as if that understanding was true to themselves, then you create the us versus them paradigm and you create that inherent conflict.
I think that was one of my real concerns when the whole sort of BLM movement took off and stuff. And I know obviously at the time it was such a massive topic, seemingly all over the Western world. But I was really concerned at the time that it was going to create more division than unification. And I think I was probably right in that. And I remember listening. Because I thought all it is trying to highlight any potential differences between us, really. It's actually just creating more separation. I remember I was watching some really interesting interviews with people like Morgan Freeman and Denzel Washington and stuff, and they were basically saying exactly that. And they were saying, you shouldn't sit here and say, oh, here's Morgan Freeman, he's a black man. You should sit there and say, this is a human, you're just a human being. The less, and it was how do you solve the problem? And he said, stop talking about it. I don't know if you've seen that that interview, that clip. I thought it was such a way. He said, just stop talking about it. Why do you have to bring it up? Why do you have to bring up what colour someone's skin is or where they're from? Just stop talking about it. I thought that's what we should be doing rather than trying to push all these movements. Just stop talking about it. So why do you have to point out any differences? Because there's always going to be physical differences between people, regardless. Even if you were born in this, in exactly the same village as somebody, and you have exactly that, your ancestors go back. And you have exactly the same, your ancestors all came from the same place too. You could be freaking 7 foot tall and they could be 5 foot tall. You could be 20 stone, you could be 250 pounds and they might be 150 pounds. You might have curly ginger hair and they might have long dark hair. Do you know what I mean? There's always going to be differences between us anyway, physically, even by people that grew up right next door to you. So why are you spending time pointing out the differences between people anyway?
I think that the next upgrade is to recognize that each individual is 100% unique. And so it's literally impossible to categorize them.
And also that there's nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong. It's actually how it's supposed to be.
Because I think what people
humans that are alike.
Because I think what you see in a lot of people, it's almost like they're trying to push that we're all the same. And it's no, we're not the same, but that's okay.
That's 100% different. 100% different. What's same about us is that we're all 100% different. There's no two genetically identical people. There's no two historically identical people. There's no two people that have the same life experience from beginning to end. No one has the same memories. No one has eaten the same food. No one has the same matter of their body. No one has the same genetic code. No one has the same absolute same look. There's literally nothing that's the same about us, yet when we're told to categorize and compare. So I think the next move is you move beyond comparison and you start to celebrate what we really are, which in my opinion is a unique miracle. There's no explanation for us in the universe. So we're a unique miracle. That's miraculous.
Yeah, and there's so much beauty in that as well. You know, like appreciate the beauty in that.
I think as well, like in like say like a plant ceremony, what I've kind of got out of ayahuasca ceremonies is it's a place to explore that. And what we were talking about earlier about you know, like music, and when the magic that comes through you and you're in the flow moment of just, you know, correlating in a moment where say you're jamming with someone like, and something comes through. That's basically two completely unique people that are just kind of sharing and in this kind of merged experience. And when you allow that to happen, you can see directly in front, you can experience like the beauty of allowing that to come through, like that truth. And I think, you know, creating safe spaces to be able to do that. And that's kind of what I got from my Blue Morpho retreat as well. It's like all these concepts of exploring a wider part of consciousness and opening up to that. You're directly experiencing that flow and you're directly experiencing that connection, and you're allowing yourself that. But normally you don't feel safe to do that sometimes in society, I feel. Like because of all of these boxes, you know. And I'm wondering why I always had this like affinity or wanting to try it and wanting to do it. And this conversation is helping me see that as well. It's like that wanting to explore, you know, that connection with people and allowing that magic to come through, and because it is completely unique and it's completely beautiful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I can really imagine this change that is happening in the world. For it to be a better place, it will you'll be able to explore that more. So yeah, kudos for the work you're doing, Hamilton, with the actual retreats, because it feels like that is what we're getting to do with other humans. So
it's interesting, like sort of getting sort of like back to that though, like back on track, because I think, you know, it's interesting for me, and I'm sure for Drew and for everybody that's listening as well, like to sort of bridge that gap, because I sort of, you know, we asked you sort of like, you know, where you went to school and stuff, and obviously we know sort of what you're doing now, obviously being so hugely successful running these Blue Morpho retreats and stuff like that. So what happened in between those things? Like, how did you get to where you are today? So you left your high school and stuff. So what happened? Because obviously you've been on a crazy journey, man.
Well, I don't know. I went to the university. I graduated from the university, and then I had the year after.
What did you do in university?
I graduated.
What did you do?
No, I did a lot of things. I mean, I went to the University of Colorado at Boulder. I studied anthropology.
Nice.
I graduated with a bachelor's degree in anthropology. I traveled a lot during that time. I saw the world. I continued my studies. I graduated in 4 years, and then
any crazy stories from those travels? Any sort of thing that sort of sticks out to you?
I had a lot of crazy stories. I had a lot of crazy stories. I had a lot of like intense traumatic stories and also beautiful ones that came out of that. I was looking for adventure and found it. Anything that sort of like sticks out that you'd feel comfortable sharing with us? I know it's like when you're put on the spot, it's hard to think, isn't it? But I mean, there were some serious ones. I think probably the craziest story. I mean, there are actually a few, but I mean, like there was a 6-month period of time when things got really intense on those travels, and I went through a kidnapping in Vietnam, and then I went through and I got us out of it. It was a small group of us, and I don't expect you to say that, because that is really crazy. Yeah, it was really crazy. Do you mind talking about that a little bit? Or if you don't want to, that's obviously 100% fine. No. It's actually like, you know, I mean, it's just a memory now from many, many years ago. But sure. So, I mean, that, and then I was also in Central America, and we got carjacked at gunpoint, and then there was a high-speed chase, and we fled for our lives and got away from that. And do you ever know why you were taken captive in Vietnam? Like, what was the reasoning behind that? Do you know? Ultimately, we don't know. It was just an odd series of experiences. I mean, I can quickly tell the story. So, if they don't mind. Yeah, so we, a small group of us. We were in the university at the time. We were traveling. There's like a few guys and a couple girls with us, and we were just friends. And we were all traveling together. We went about 3.5 hours from a city down to a beach area, and we organized like some private transportation. and everything seemed cool, like completely normal and everything. We went through the day, and we needed to get back to the city by a certain time that night. And we were part of a school program that had a curfew, so we had to get back. And so we had spent the day at the beach, and it was like time to go. And, you know, we tell the tour guides, like, well, where's the car? And the car's not there. And they're just like, oh, it's coming. Well, where's the car? The car's not there. Oh, it's coming. And we were in like a place where you couldn't just go get transportation, right? And then, so it was like odd. And I'm kind of telling everybody, hey, watch out. Something's really weird going on here. And so all of a sudden, another car pulls up, has the same driver, but other people. And they're like, oh, we're going to go in this car. And I'm like, oh, something's really weird. So we don't have a choice. We get in the car. It's like a big, minivan. It's going to take us back. And as soon as we're in the minivan, what looks like, quintessential gang members, like 5 of them leap in the van and all sit next to everybody. They close the door and they lock it, and they just take off in the van with us inside. And so at that point, I know we're kidnapped. It's that simple. It's like, okay, we've just been kidnapped. We got in the car ourselves. We didn't know this was going to happen. So here we go. So we take off down the road, and I remembered the road that we came in on, and we're going down towards that road. So I'm watching to make sure everything's okay. And then all of a sudden they just peel off the road, and they're going down these rice paddies into like absolute nowhere. And, just into the wilderness, like just rice paddy after rice paddy after rice paddy. We're on a dirt road.
What was going through your head while this was happening? Can you remember?
Oh yeah. I mean, what was going through my head is like, we got to get out of here. Like we got to figure a way out of this, and we need to get back. And, So it turns out that in my backpack, I had some sleeping pills with me. And so I see in the far distance, I see a sign for beer, like what would be like as far down the road as you could possibly see. And so I start to hype the guys up in the car that I'm going to get them all drunk and that I want to start drinking beers. And they think this is great. So I get them to pull over and buy a case of beer. And then I hype up that I have ecstasy, like party drugs, when they're not. They're actually sleeping pills. And so I slip everyone sleeping pills and make them all pound beers with me and drug the entire car.
That takes a certain level of like not just intelligence but of confidence to do that. I'm impressed. Like man to man, I'm impressed.
It was intense. It was really intense. Intense. And so I ultimately give them all and convince them, like they convince us to get into the car. I convince them that everything's great. Like we act like nothing's going on. We don't know what's going on. And so, I know it's going to take like 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes for this stuff to kick in. And so I tell all the guys, and we were all college guys. We were all, sports guys and big. And so I just tell everybody like, this is going to take another, 15, 20 minutes. But when it happens on go, we're taking the car. Like we're going to take this car from the inside out. And so, we wait. And pretty soon, like the heads of the people start kind of lollygagging like this. And when that happens, I say, okay, now. And at that point, it was just like each one of the guys took one of the guys, and we just submitted everybody in the car. And, and then so we submitted everybody in the car. And I also, it turned out, I had a pocket knife kind of thing with me. And so I pulled it and to the only guy that could speak English, I just held it to him and I said, you're going to turn the car around and you're going to drive us back, and we need to make curfew. And so,
well, that's the main thing. We need to be back by curfew, man.
Absolutely. So we took the car at that point. We take over the car, and I tell the driver, like, get us back to the city. And I don't tell him how to go, right? I'm testing him to see whether or not we're just paranoid and have completely lost it, or maybe there's something really true going on behind the scenes. And no, he turns the car literally directly right around. 3-point turns the car on the 2-lane dirt road, drives us straight back to the highway, and drove us literally straight back on the path all the way there. And we just, at that point, had taken the car and we had commandeered it, and we made the driver drive us back the 3.5 hours. We had to stop and get gas along the way, and we made sure everyone was completely subdued during that period of time, so there wouldn't be any, shenanigans. And then when we got into the city... I like how you just let him stay in the car, though. It's very civilized of you. You just chuck him out. We didn't know. There was no one else to get us back, right? That was the weirdest thing. Is you couldn't just jump out and get another taxi. And Yeah, I mean, we were like, it could have led to something worse. So we ended up, as soon as we got like within the outskirts of Saigon at that time, we had them pull over the car as soon as there was like, we could see taxis and other stuff like that. And we jumped out of the car at that point. We jumped into other transportation and took off and got back about like within 10 minutes of curfew.
Wow, I love how you still made your curfew. That's just like the icing on the cake, isn't it?
We did, and we couldn't tell anyone there. I mean, it was a school program. We couldn't tell anyone there what had happened, or it was just sort of like, okay, everybody, hey, we made it. We all walked in, and hey, good night. Hey guys, it was a good one. So that was an interesting time.
That's crazy.
We got out of it. Yeah.
What about the one in Central America?
Oh, that's a wild scenario. So at the time, my brother was living in Costa Rica, and I was doing a study abroad in Costa Rica. He had just graduated from college, and he was taking like a year off and was down there. And he was going to move back to the States. And so he decided to drive his car from Costa Rica back to California. And so we were going to go all through Central America, and I was going to go with them from Costa Rica to Guatemala, and then fly back down to Costa Rica to continue my education. And so we are going through El Salvador, and all the signs say, all the books, everything at the time say like, just don't be out at night. Whatever you do, don't be out at night. And so we had planned to get to the hotel. When you drive in a car, you got to find hotels that have gated parking. So it's like really minimal where you can stay. And in the area where we were going to be, there was literally only one hotel, and it was about like 15 minutes off the main highway down a mountain road to get to like the little town where they had this guarded parking. And so we're supposed to be there like a couple hours before sunset, and everything's supposed to be okay. But it turned out Hurricane Mitch had just come through and had destroyed all the bridges and highways and roads and stuff. And so we got to this area where the bridge had been washed out, and there was just a railroad trestle that was still there to get across the river. And the Salvadorian government was allowing cars to go 3 hours in each direction. So 3 hours one way, 3 hours the next. And we didn't know that. And we came up on it right when it switched. And so we were just stuck in a line of traffic on the road, watching nighttime come and knowing that this was like really bad, That was like things were going to get really dangerous for us. And so we just watched and waited. Nighttime came, and then we finally got to go across the bridge, and we went like another hour down the highway to get to where we had pull off to go down the mountain road. And it was a really interesting place because that corner turned out to be a big truck stop. It was all flood lit, and that's going to be important later in the story. So it's all flood lit. It's like a big thing. Like you could see it in the distance, like huge lights and everything. And it was like a shopping center kind of, corner, part of the highway there, that system. And so we pull off it and everything's normal. We just start going down the 2-lane mountain road. It's super mountainous, there's no guardrail on the side, cliffs on the side of the road kind of thing. And as we get like a couple minutes down the road, this car comes up behind us and is driving really erratically. It's speeding up on us, backing off. It's being just erratic. It's going across both lanes and stuff. And so my brother decides to hug the side of the road closest to the mountainside and let them pass. And they rush up on us, and they come literally window to window with us. So, passenger side to driver's side where my brother is, and the passenger window's down, and there's a guy with a huge gun in our face, and guys from the back of the pickup truck come up with shotguns and rifles on us. And we saw immediately like a number of weapons pointed at us. And my brother instinctively just slams on the brakes. Immediately slams on the brakes. So their car shoots in front of us, probably about 50 yards. They T-bone the street so we can't go by. They slide the car, blocking the street. They jump out of the car to run us down. And right at that moment, my brother starts to do a 3-point turn to get us out of there. The road's so narrow you can't U-turn. So he 3-point turns and he gets us out in the other direction before they can fire on us. They run back into the truck, and now they start to come up on us like a high-speed chase going around this mountain road. And so we're going 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. The rear of the car's sliding out on every corner. My brother's counter steering around every single corner of this. And then there's a good 500-yard straightaway as we go into the highway. And that's all floodlit. So we can see that on both sides of the highway, there's no on-ramps and off-ramps. On both sides, there's traffic. And on the closest side to us, there's one truck passing another truck with this huge line of cars behind it. And on the other side, it's just sporadic traffic. And my brother just floors the car at the traffic. And, now we're going like 50, 60, 70 miles an hour. When we get like almost to the traffic, the cars are all honking at us, like what's going on? The pickups behind us, they're still chasing us down. My brother don't even know how he does. He slams the brakes, turns the wheel, and puts the car into like a sideways slide. We slide literally like across the incoming traffic. The truck lights go right past us, like barely miss us head on. We go off the road on the other side and pop back on the road in the flow of traffic with everybody and just heading down the road, and escaped. And then after that, the rest of the car shaking like this,
God.
Like how could that even have
initiation
happened?
Experiences.
Man, that is crazy.
It was
in
intense,
the modern world.
yeah.
That is crazy, man.
So those two events happened within like a number, like 3-4 months of each other.
Dude, I've had a couple crazy things happen to me in my life, but I think that's sort of that you beat me on the crazy stories.
And that's before you got to the Amazon.
Yeah, that was before, but that was like prepping me for already outside of the box experiences.
Yeah, man, just some crazy college stories, dude. That's amazing, man. Thanks for sharing them with us, by the way,
Sure.
dude. Fascinating stories, man. So what's sort of next on your evolution, sort of as a human being? So you leave college. What's next?
Yeah, so I left college, and it was an interesting scenario because my mentor in college died right when I was graduating. So like the guy who was setting up the next part of my life died, and then I didn't have a direction at that point. It was really odd for me because it was a huge trauma to lose, like this person that was so close to me.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Also like true mentor, like had set up, what my job would be and where I was going, and had created this, like international life already, and I was continuing it, and then it was just gone. It was like the rug got pulled, and I was just on my own. And so I was like trying to figure out what I was going to do next, and hadn't already prepped other jobs and stuff like that. So it was kind of like this no man's land time. And that took me to the year after college, ultimately having my first spiritual awakening. And then that sending me on the direction and course of life that brings me to this conversation.
So what was that spiritual awakening?
Well, I gave my life to spirit. I realized like I didn't want a life anymore, and I didn't want to die. So I just gave my life to spirit. I didn't even believe in spirit at the time when I did it. I didn't think anything would happen. And I had a consciousness awakening from having done that experience. And that consciousness awakening led to visions, and through those visionary experiences being told that I was going to go to Peru, that there were master mystics / shamans waiting for me, and that they had been seeing me for a long time, and that I was going to be guided to them and then start to train with them.
Can you explain that process a little bit more? Because I think obviously a lot of people get lost in life, and obviously don't end up having such a profound experience to you. So you make the decision to turn yourself over to spirit.
Yeah.
So can you actually sort of like going back to that moment, can you explain that in a little bit more detail for someone like myself? Because to be honest, and I think a lot of people listening, they don't really know what that means.
That's okay. It's not something I recommend.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that to others too. I mean, I know that this is now, from the previous stories moving to some anomalies, We were kind of like in the flow of normal, and now we're kind of moving to some serious anomalies. But I mean, I didn't have a frame of reference for it either. I figured, people talked about Great Spirit, there's spirit in religion, this animation of the universe kind of a thing.
Like all the different religions talk about different spirits, whether it's...
Yeah, but I didn't have a frame of reference for it. I didn't know, though. Right. I mean, I had no idea, right?
Yeah, sure.
And so all that happened was I was in my mom's kitchen. I turned to the wall / windows, and I just give my life to spirit. Like I just, in my head, I say, I don't want my life anymore. I don't know what to do with it. Spirit, if you want my life, have it. Like, it's yours.
Right.
It's yours. It's not mine anymore. It's yours. Sober. Like, I'm stone cold sober. It's just an evening in my mom's house. I have this moment. And it was really neat in the moment. Like, there's no, like, you know, claps of thunder. There's no, like, great sick sign. Like, nothing. Like, it's just like this moment happens, but something in my heart, like, changed. Fundamentally, something in my heart did change. I remember tears started to come down my face, but I wasn't crying. Like, I wasn't sobbing, just tears poured from my eyes.
Was it because of how intense it was, sort of thing?
I was so real. Like, I didn't know what I was doing, but I was doing something real. I had no idea what it meant, because I didn't even believe in spirit. I didn't have any clue of what this meant. I just was doing it. Like I was giving my life to spirit. And I just felt something deep inside me. It was just so honest and authentic. And then I went to bed, and I didn't think anything would happen. And then I started to have, like, very strange experiences for me. Like, I started to have lucid dreams where I saw beings. I started to be aware of presences that were around me. They were confirmed by other people that I didn't speak to.
Wow.
It was very odd. Like, I don't have a better description for that. Like, I knew that other people were not in general experiencing what I was experiencing. I knew it was because I had given my life to spirit. I didn't know what that meant. This thing had happened, and
sorry, Hamilton, when you say that,
take it back.
When you say these things were confirmed by people that you weren't speaking to, what do you mean by that?
No, I mean, like, I didn't tell them that I was seeing anything.
Oh, sorry, right.
And other people would come up to me, and, like, random people, and be like, oh, hey, do you not see the 3 people standing behind your right shoulder? But there was no one standing there. But I knew there were presences. Like, like, you know when you walk into a room and you're like, I'm not alone, but you're physically alone? You're like, I'm not alone? Yeah. It was like that, only all the time. All of a sudden, I felt like stuff was there. Like, that vibe of, like, going into a room where there's nothing there, but you feel like you're not alone. That was like 24 hours a day.
Wow.
And I would dream stuff in that space. I was sober at the time. I didn't take, you know, visionary plants or anything like that. It was just happening. And I started to have, at the same time, awarenesses of universal consciousness, awareness of universal experiences. I had, like, a whole, like, samadhi awakening, like, you know, enlightenment awakening through that process. And it was all confirmed. That's the weirdest part. It wasn't just like I was having a personal experience. People would come up to me and be like, oh, hi, I'm supposed to meet you. I have a book for you. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? Like, this is completely, you know, outside the norm. I would be around people, and they would be reading books, and I could hear what they had read and talk with them about the books without having read the book. And talk about the book, because I could hear them read the book. Whoa. And, like, this happened and was confirmed over and over and over again. And so that occurred over about 6 weeks to 2 months. And then I had the visions that I was going to be going to Peru, and that there were these people there that were waiting for me. And then all of that played out over the next 6 months.
Wow. So you literally just, so from that you got a plane to Peru?
Yeah, I mean, I've told the story on a number of other interviews, but yeah, I was like, this is not true. I don't get this. I don't understand. I'm not going. And then in the vision, they would be like, you know, you're going. And then I'm like, no, I'm not going. And then they're like, go to this website at this time, and there will be a ticket that you're going to buy, and you're going to go. And so I went to the website at that time, and sure enough, there was the ticket. It was half price, just like they said it would be. And so I bought the ticket to Peru, and it was, you know, scheduled for a couple months in the future so that I could, like, prepare. I was, you know, how do you, like, go seek this prophecy of, you know, connection with people, and supposedly people are going to take me in and train me? Like, it just seems so far-fetched. So I planned it a couple months in advance, and then, yeah, a couple months went by, and I got on the plane and I went to Peru.
Yeah, I know obviously, like, Drew's watched a lot of interviews with you before and stuff, and he sort of explained on a couple of different previous Pandora's Box episodes, sort of like this part of the story. So you am I right in saying that you eventually found what sort of one of the top shamans in Peru? Is that right? And you started sort of training under him?
Yeah.
Julio.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, I was told that I would find them in 90 days. I found them within 70 to 80 days. And then I stayed out in the forest there for the next year and
you
a
were
half.
Told in your dreams,
and
or?
Then I was like, I mean, it's kind of extra sensory perception, but yes, I was told in dreams, and I was told in trances, and I was told in meditations. And I was told to find a guide. I mean, the real path was I was told to find a guide, and that guide's name was in a Lonely Planet guidebook. And he was the only guy from the city who knew to guide into that part of the forest where those guys were. So out of a city of 500,000 people, there was one guy who knew how to get out to where these mystics were, and he knew them. And so I was told to meet him. Now, what's interesting is I told this to a young couple that was traveling also. They were backpackers. They were a UK couple. And they actually went to the city where the guy lived before I did, met him randomly, told him my story. So the guy I needed to find picked me up at the airport.
Wow.
Like literally the one guy that could take me to the people, that had these visions without me knowing, actually picked me up from the airport, and the very same day took me out to them.
That's crazy, man. So when you finally
and this is like before the internet was all out there. This was like from a book, right? This is like literally a name in a book.
Yeah, like it's really hard to actually find things in those days. Like if you just wanted to track somebody down or something down, you can't just Google it or whatever. Yeah. So when you finally met, was his name Don Julio? Did you say?
Yeah, Don Julio. Yeah.
So when you first finally met him, like, how did he receive you? What was that like?
He just treated me as like another person. He didn't show any other kind of like awareness or knowledge of anything associated with me. But I found out later that they just put me into a state of observation. They observed me for about a year and a half, and then
so you stayed there for literally a year and a half with them.
Yeah, out and just living in the middle of the forest. I literally became their neighbors. I was like, well, I've been told to live here, so I'm just going to live here.
Okay, that's mad,
I did anything Spirit told me. Yeah, I did literally anything Spirit told me. So Spirit was like, you're going to live here. And I'm like, well, how am I going to live here? They're like, well, get a permission from the locals to live there. So I went to the locals and I'm like, I want to live here. And they said, well, you have to be voted in. I said, okay, well, how do you do that? They held the town meeting. You had to have a unanimous heads of family vote. They asked me to present a speech on why I wanted to live there. I told them the truth. And they said, oh, yeah, you can live here. You can live up there. So then I had to build a house. So then I learned how to build a house in the forest in my early 20s. I was like 23, 24 years old. I built a house. And then I started to live in that house. And that was like 500 meters away from Don Julio's house. And so I just waited and lived out there and learned how to live. I learned how to canoe, learned how to fish, learned how to farm, learned how to build, learned how to talk with them, everything until I was accepted. And then after a year and a half, I was accepted to apprentice.
Wow, and that's when you actually started learning?
Yeah, that's when they turned on the education.
So was that like... what was the education like? So was that just like through doing, ayahuasca ceremonies and sort of like learning and growing your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, formal training starts really just with ceremonies and with what they call dieta, these purification experiences. And so they take you through that process. It's a rite of passage. It's very difficult. Most people fail it. It's very, very difficult. And they give you lots of plant medicine, and then they put you through tremendous fasts. And some of those plant medicines are psychoactive and some of them aren't. But you learn how to work with all the plants by ingesting them and learning directly from them. So you go into a trance state where you become capable of receiving the plant and you go into communication with it. And this is the traditional way. They've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. So, this is not outside the box for them. It sounds weird for us or strange, but this is how they got educated out in the forest for thousands of years. And I got to live through that process. And so I know the day when I couldn't hear anything or understand anything to all of a sudden the day I went, oh my God, this plant is communicating with me and I'm learning from it. Like I know that exact moment when it changed. And I got brought into their tradition and got to train in a traditional way. And I went all the way through the training. I barely survived it, like they said. It was a true test of survival, both physically, mentally, emotionally. And I came out the other side of it, considered what they call a maestro or, master medico vegetalista. I was given the title when I was 25 and I've, carried forward that path for the last 20 years.
Okay. So can you talk about some of the more notable experiences that you had while you were going through this process? I imagine that there was some crazy stuff that you were experiencing. I don't know how do you describe it, like on the astral plane or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first like really intense experience that I had, like the one that I think is most noted, and I've also shared this before, was the day that they decided to train me. They took me into a ceremony. We drank ayahuasca, and instead of having all these like psychedelic visions, there were no visions. There was just a presence of a density that was squashing me, and it felt like death. And it felt like I was being drawn down a tunnel, and it had a direction and a density and a pressure, and it just pushed until I blacked out. And I have no idea, because now you're blacked out, you don't know how long that was. And when I came to, I was in my chair, so it could have been no second or it could have been lots of seconds, I don't know. I'm sitting in my chair next to Julio, and there's another shaman there too, and Julio and the other shaman are in my mind, like literally in my head. Like you can hear your thoughts, and now there are three. If you could imagine right now, there were three people in your head. I thought my brain had, something wrong had happened, and so so the guy's sitting next to me, right, like right next to me, and so I think to him in my brain. I don't say anything. I just think, Julio, can you pass me a cigarette? Right? Just like you would tell a mate, like, hey, pass me a cigarette, right? Yeah. But in my brain, without making a sound, he reaches in his pocket and he hands me a cigarette. He looks at me and goes, ha, 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 ha. And that's when I knew that training had started. Like that was the moment I knew training had started. And then it was on. Then they were, there the whole time. And then, now you're being guided the whole time in the process. And so they were there with me like that for a number of years until I was, capable of holding that on my own. And then they weren't there anymore. They weren't like in it. They were still connected, but no longer, in my head.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, with our closest like friends and loved ones and that, I think most of us have experienced times where you sort of feel what the other person's thinking. Sometimes you might think that they're speaking out loud, and then afterwards, you realize that they weren't. Or, I think the most common thing is people say like, you finish each other's sentences and stuff, and that's probably like on a very low level. But there is something that happens, I think, that people can tune in and out of a little bit if you're close with somebody, where you do get on this level with somebody. I also think, as Drew said earlier, with music, I think if you jam with somebody that is sort of on a good level with, it's very hard to like jam with people that you're not on a good level with. But if you do find somebody that you have a connection with, you manage to get on this place where you can almost like naturally interpret what the other person's going to do next. So then you end up in this almost like flow state where you're doing stuff, and it is almost like semi-psychic. But I think for most people, obviously, that is at an extremely novice level. What it seems like is you're taking that little thing that we as people, most people sort of like flirt with, if you want to call it that, or just skirt in and out of. And what you've done is like directly hone that, obviously, from masters of that, and using like substances on the planet that have like helped guide that, and to actually almost like harness it, almost like the same way that humans managed to somehow harness electricity, and now you can just like switch something in and plug it on, and flip a switch and turn it on. That's crazy.
Exactly right. I think that's exactly right. The difference, you go back to earlier in the podcast, we discussed about, parents reducing people, like their kids' capacities for reasons around linguistics and understandings. These guys were there to open it. So they're there to take that phenomena, which is this like, hey, there's a connection between us, and maximize it and amplify it and maximize it and train it. And not also try to produce a feat of like psychic ability. It's not like that. It's like, hey, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and it doesn't matter. There's no stress over it, right? There's no like perceived outcome that you need to like try to fake or anything like that. And it's just progressive and developmental. And so if it's not there yet, they continue to give you more plants, and they continue to work on you until little by little by little these transformations take place, and those kinds of interconnectedness between us become just much more powerful and much more attuned.
Yeah, so fascinating, man. So, how long after that? So, you've become like did you say it's like a maestro? Is it like what it's called? So, how long after that? Like, so what did you do after that? So, you've become a maestro. So what was next?
Well, I mean, you continue to practice. Fundamentally, you have a role within society here, which is that people come to you for all different reasons, looking for support. So some is advice, and some's counseling, and some is healing and plant medicine, and some is visionary, and you know how to heal things on what they call a spiritual level. But I think I've come up with a little bit better way to explain it, for Western people who don't really understand that. You got to think that there's like something behind your dreams, and there's something behind your thoughts. Like they're not just random, right? Like there's context. And what we understand is that our consciousness actually has a code in it, right? And what they call spirit is the code of our consciousness. So our consciousness isn't just random. It isn't just like random light. It's not just whatever. There's an actual structure to it. Like your computer has a code. Your mind has a language that you can think in pictures or sound or language and numbers. Well, your consciousness also has a code in it. And these guys learned how to understand that code and go into that code and tinker with it and change it for the purpose of healing people. And so they literally figured that out. These guys have figured out over thousands of years how to go into the code of your consciousness, and it's a matrix of light, and it moves very, very fast, and you see it in the psychedelic experience. And they actually learned how to not just trip it, but go into it and fundamentally alter that code for healing purposes or for the well-being of people. And they mastered it. They truly mastered it. And that's what a maestro is. A maestro is a person who knows how to go into that code inside somebody and then start to change it on a fundamental level. They have like tools that they've figured out, like sound, percussion, intention, word that is codified. Like they figured it out. It's a true code that can be repeated over and over and over again. And it can get somebody past like the subconscious and unconscious into that code, and then they can recode it and produce like really incredible and miraculous changes in somebody because of it. And so I think that's a better way to describe it.
Yeah, it's amazing, man. So how long after this did you start thinking about setting up your Blue Morpho retreat? Was that like a natural progression to you? You started thinking you wanted to share this with the wider world? Because I guess at this point, it's still almost like a little secret, or that's what it seems like, especially back in those days, as you said, like this was before the internet, I think you said. Obviously, I guess at the time it was something that unless you were sort of in with those tribes and stuff, you didn't really know anything about it. So did you just start thinking, I think this could help, a lot of people in the world? And
sort of. I mean, the Blue Morpho is a kind of a parallel story. So to be out here, I needed to fund myself.
Oh, okay.
And Blue Morpho was a way to fund myself. But Blue Morpho in its first iteration was just a jungle adventure trekking business, because where I was living was the most remote of any tourism operation already operating out of the city of Iquitos. And so I decided to just take people out there, like true trekkers, backpacker trekkers. This was not a casual experience. You were going to go beyond civilization into the wilderness, into the uninhabited wilderness between the Peruvian and Brazilian border area. And you were going to go and be in the forest, live off the forest for 3 to 8 days at a time, and go on a true adventure. And I thought that was just amazing.
Yeah, it sort of seems like a no-brainer as well, because that there would be like some diehard adventurers out there, whether it's like Americans, Australians, people from the UK that would probably feel more comfortable doing that with an American, just obviously speak the same language, etc., things like that,
Yeah, and so since my house was the last house. So if you went right outside our house and you turned upriver, you were now beyond inhabitants, right? So So what that ultimately turned into is that when I would go out to apprentice and do dieta and plant medicine, I would take them out and we would take a guide, and the guests would go upriver further, and I would stay at the house and do my apprenticeship. But it was 24 hours, travel to get there. And so during those 24 hours, of course, people would ask me what I was doing and how I ended up there and, all that kind of stuff. And so I would tell them, and within like a year of doing this, people were less interested in going on the trek and more interested in participating in the plant medicine. Wow. And so they just said like, hey, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have this. Can you guys help me? Like, this sounds amazing. Like, can you guys help? And so we started to allow people to experience the plant medicine instead of going on the trek. So they would sign up for a trek. They would elect to do the plant medicine experience. And that then led to transformation in them, and they started to write and publicize about their experiences. And so within 2 years, there were stories published about us by the New York Times. Within 4 years, National Geographic and most syndicated news globally, and everything took off from there.
So interesting that was just a completely organic and natural progression rather than something that you set out to do.
Yeah, there was literally no orchestration. We were just performing the local medicine and practicing with plants and supporting people both locally, tribes and individual mestizo, Peruvian population, and then Westerners, and then publications everywhere about this.
Man, that's so interesting. I suppose it just like naturally grew from there to where you are today. Yeah, so
and we just continued to help people. The goal was just, at that point, it was, help people as best we can with something that was phenomenal, because at that time, and still, there was very little support for what ayahuasca plant medicine and the Amazonian plant medicine did incredibly well for Westerners, which was help them with psychological, difficulty. Yeah. So trauma, addiction, PTSD, depression, anxiety, all of that is dramatically benefited and supported, both scientifically now proven and anecdotally by millions of people, that these plants help that. And so it really was a discovery to share with the world that, hey, there is a solution out here for a growing global problem. We found it in the Amazon, and you can come and experience this. And then that led over the next 15 years to, personal optimization, moving past blockages, personal improvement, and the idea of literally having just a better life through these practices.
Yeah, sure. One thing that I thought was really interesting when Drew was telling us about his experience at Blue Morpho, and obviously set in the background talking about yourself and what he knew of your training and your progression, was he was saying that some of the tribes or some of the I don't want to call them rival, just quote unquote rival shamans and stuff, weren't very happy about the fact that like a white American were being taught sort of these practices. Can you sort of go into a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, locally at that time, this is this is early 2000s, so 2001, 2002, 2003, it was still taboo to teach a foreigner. So to have a foreign apprentice or a foreign student was literally taboo. They were allowed to come and experience, but they were not allowed to learn. These were lineages that had survived conquest over the last thousands of years. They are Amazonian lineages passed down from, grandfather or grandmother to, son and daughter to grandson and granddaughter down these family lines. And so to invite foreigners in was just taboo. And there's a rich culture of spiritual warfare and battling and power games that get played out amongst the locals. And so when I arrived in that scene, it turned out that the lineage that I was brought into both was a healer of that. So there was already a lot of that to begin with. And they really didn't like it that they had agreed to teach a foreigner, which was literally a taboo. So you break a culture taboo, there's consequences associated with it. And so we lived through those consequences.
So fascinating. Can you, did you ever notice any like sort of blatant hostility towards you?
I received death threats. I received arson threats. I received, I was told by rivals to leave the area or I would be murdered. It was kind of constant. I lived through that for about, 10 plus years. That was just kind of, all the time. And this isn't like made up, these were hits that were put out, in towns. People would come up to me and say, hey, watch your back. This guy's saying they're going to do this to you, et cetera. Like this was known. It wasn't, like I say, it wasn't some paranoia. It was just part and parcel of living deep in the wilderness. But I also had really strong protections. I was very well.
I was just about to ask, why do you think that people didn't pull the trigger on that? But you're going into it anyway.
There's a lot of threats out there, and you never know in the face of threats. But I was also protected by a local tribe. It turned out that one day I was brought a baby. A mother was holding a baby, and they just walked into my house. And there was no one else there to help the baby, and the baby looked semi-dead. It was listless and semi-conscious and hadn't nursed in a number of days, and she didn't know what to do. And I heard like a clear direction to heal the baby with a shakapa, a rattle. And And so I went over to the baby and I performed this healing ritual on the baby. And within 15 minutes, the baby was nursing, fully conscious, skin color had changed, and was just better. And that was the day I decided that I really wanted to do this, because that was just so miraculous. And I didn't know who it was. It turned out to be the tribal chief's grandson. And the woman was the chief's daughter. So the next day, with the baby fully healed, canoes showed up filled with the leadership of the tribe. And they walked into my house and they told me that they would protect me and keep me alive.
That's amazing, man. That's amazing. Way to get into the good graces as well. Like, obviously accidentally helping out like the daughter and grandson of the lead chief, man. One thing I thought was really fascinating that Drew was touching on as well, that he'd heard you speak of before, was some of these like sort of astral battles that were going on between some of the more, because it was interesting, because I guess for somebody that's not into it, you might think that there was just sort of like one overriding philosophy with the whole sort of these ayahuasca shamans and stuff like that. But by from what Drew was explaining, there are almost like, I guess how we would see it in layman's terms, almost like dark, almost like dark, more malevolent sort of shamans, and then you've got the more benevolent ones. And that these almost like battles would happen on the astral plane. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because to me, that just seems fascinating. That seems like something from almost like a Marvel movie or something,
Yeah. Well, I mean, fundamentally, it is. It is. Like, I think what most people don't know about is that the sci-fi mythology that's presented in those movies is ultimately written out of anthropological studies of these cultures.
Yeah, sure.
So you go, you kind of walk it back. So you go like, okay, Star Wars, Marvel movies, etc., have a very clear like arc of light and dark and the embattlement of them and this deeper force or this deeper energy that's involved, and these wizards and sorcerers and stuff. And like I guess
that. Even like direct influence by mythology, like an easy way to think about that would be like Thor. He's a Norse god. That's
exactly.
Like that's a direct one, but
precisely. And so you walk that back into history and you find out that these cultures fully believed in it. And you go into this idea of the consciousness and this code inside consciousness. And there are, in these codes, these great forms of energy, these great deities, and they're in conflict with each other, according to the stories. And these people decided to bring that fight to each other. And so, the light ones fight the dark ones, and the dark ones fight the light ones.
Have you experienced that yourself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was steeped in it. I was steeped in it from...
I know it might be beginning. I know it might be hard, but how to somebody that's never experienced these things, can you try and explain what that is like at the time? So there's this crazy battle going on in the astral plane. Like, what is that
life
like?
Or death.
Like for a way for you to describe that, like visually almost to us, like what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to figure this out. So fundamentally, what I think happens is like you're in vision, right? So first of all, you're in a vision, and so. Imagine if you were like now just teleported into like a crazy sci-fi war scene, right? Like imagine you were just teleported into Lord of the Rings, like when they're all demons are just besieging some like city kind of scenario, right? So imagine you just got thrown into that and you are up there kind of like seeing it all. And it's sort of like a massive video game where you could like start to command different groups to do different things, and you're in it. And you're seeing it real time, and you can't get out of it. I think the key element is there's no off button, there's no power button. It's just on. It's happening, and it's like Drew just said, life or death. You're going to be severely not okay if you survive it and you get really hurt in it. So that's now happening, and you start to command different kinds of beings and spirits and forces within that scene. And you see those energies go and they battle each other, and ultimately you battle to the other person until...
What do they look like? What do these beings look like?
I mean, some look like, demonography, like if you opened up, Google and just wrote like demons.
Scriptures, old scriptures and religious texts and things.
Some look like, monsters. Some look like alien stuff. Some looks like skeletons. Intense, some look like just deities. Some look like
So some of them are very beautiful, but also
figures.
some of them are very, I guess, for lack of a better word, like almost like evil looking, malevolent looking. But some of them are also very beautiful and sort of awe-inspiring. That's absolutely fascinating, man. That's absolutely fascinating.
And you can't get out of it. I mean, the key element is that you cannot get out of this vision. It's like you're stuck in it, and you know that there's another person on the other side of it that's driving it, and you have to ultimately win.
So it's like a game of chess.
It is a game of chess. It's a form of consciousness chess. And I think it's ultimately the oldest war. I think that this was the original war that psychedelic tribal people were getting involved in very, very early on in human history, and it has continued to the day in these isolated societies that still practice it.
Yeah, it's interesting. They talk about even in like the Bible and stuff, there's like reference to like the burning bush, isn't there, and things like that. Where was it Moses with the burning bush, and that's when he received the 10 Commandments, and am I thinking of something different, or was it like that? There was that tablet? I'm not overly religious, so I don't know, but I'm just interested in some of the things I've heard. But do you know what I'm on about, the burning bush and stuff like that in the Bible and things like that? I think it was Moses, wasn't it? And God spoke to him, and so all these different religious texts from across the world, they talk about things like that.
Yeah, and it's all in there. I mean, everything you see inside the visions represents the mythology that the people understand.
Yeah,
and so you can see Egyptian deities, you can see Hindu deities, you can see spirits, you can see evil creatures, you can see light, dark, everything across the board. There's the angelic that's possible to see in there. It's all in our consciousness. I think what's important to understand is that this is about our consciousness, not about the stuff existing outside us. It's about something that's inherent to us. And I think that helps kind of ground the understanding. This is two people in different parts of the world that have all this stuff in their consciousness, and they're tapping into something collective. The collective consciousness has been theorized, and these people prove it. And it's ultimately unfortunate cosmic battle that they have with each other, although I do believe that is coming to an end. I think a big evolution of this is finally coming to an end. And people say, well, like, how could this even exist? And I think, well, like, going back to our earlier part of the conversation, how could even global conventional warfare exist? Yeah, right? Sure. How could that exist? So I think this predates it. I think this is like the great conflict we have in our consciousness, and then that great conflict gets expressed out into all the physical ways we manifest, technology and understanding and social structure.
Yeah,
but
I think when it comes to
for a long time.
Yeah, man. I think when it comes to belief and stuff, it's just it's like if something's documented, like, to the world, then people believe it. But if it's not, they don't. I mean, we see it all the time. But I mean, it's like they say, don't they, about people thought that like mountain gorillas in Africa were a myth right up until about 100 years ago. And so it was like one minute it's like this fairy tale. Now, they're in zoos all over the world, So, no, I think that's
exactly
a very important thing to keep us, because it's that thing, isn't it? Just because we can't see it, or just because it's not documented yet, it's almost like a lot of people are tempted to just write it off.
Yeah, I just don't even think it exists at all. And I don't even know how relevant it is ultimately to the Western world. I think what is relevant is to understand that the arts associated with it are being utilized all over the Western world, but in a different way. And so propaganda is it? Mind control is it? Predative marketing is it? So all those things is the exact same thing. So when you see, incessant lies put out there into the world, that's it. When you see all these billboards and advertisements for all this stuff that isn't really just selling what it is, it's this whole hoopla and fantasy scene around it, that's the same kind of concepts. And so, ultimately to disregard it is foolish, because the world has just morphed it into the way that we sell stuff, predate on each other, and use it now in a modern way. And the modern proliferation is much more extensive than the tribal proliferation. So, there's a lot more of this propaganda going on in the world than there is this kind of shamanic warfare. But the propaganda is part of a war. It's a propaganda war. It's part of PSYOPs. And it's very well documented and known about. And it's not a conspiracy. And it's global. And it's all the time. And so, just to be aware of that.
On a deeper spiritual level, do you think that there is literally like a malevolent entity and a benevolent one, or malevolent entities and benevolent entities that are almost like influencing us and sort of driving the way we are?
I do, but I think it's us. I don't think it's external to us. I think
so. We're giving power to them, and as a result, they are we're allowing them to drive the way we are.
Yeah, but I don't even think the them is separate from us. I think that that's a code within us. That's how we understand us. So I think that's like it's not an external bad guy. It's an internal bad guy.
Right. And that's why there's got to be the change in philosophy, like you were saying about earlier, because the philosophy now is creating those things within us.
So we have it in us. It's not something else. I don't think there's like some bad guy way over there who got in us. I think we created a bad guy inside us.
It's a bit like when they say...
like a mind disease.
Yeah, it's a bit like when they say, I know it's a cheesy quote, but when they say that, there's 2 wolves in you, which one do you want to feed? It's like that thing, isn't it?
Exactly. Yes, just like that. And I think that's us. Like, that's to me the consciousness code that we're talking about. That's the thing that's, that's the predator in us, or the thing we can't relate to. And we might mythologize it as like a spooky figure in a black cloak or something like that, but it's really just the
That's more like symbolism and things like that.
That's symbolism, yeah. And that's what I'm saying. It's just us, and we don't want to externalize that to something else or somebody else, and you don't want to give power over that to anything else. It's like, no, that's just me. I need to learn to deal with me, and I need to learn to turn that off. That doesn't get to influence my decision making. That doesn't influence my choices. That doesn't influence how I understand myself. Like, that needs to be dealt with. And when we externalize it, we lose our personal responsibility over it. And that's a dangerous thing.
How much time have you got left, Hamilton? There's loads more we want to talk to you about, but Drew said that you've only got a little bit, you're limited with time. So
yeah, I have like 5 more minutes.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, I say, we really appreciate you coming on today, but we'd love to have you on again if you'd be up for it. Because I think there's a lot more that we'd both like to ask you about. I'd like to go more into AI, because obviously there's a lot of fears about AI. I'd like to talk to you all about them. Do you think any of these fears are warranted stuff? I know that Drew's really into his crypto. I know he wants to talk to you about that. And music. I think we'd like to talk to you more about music and all these things. I feel like we've just hit the tip of the iceberg. But I guess just to sort of like finish things off, just because we're on this subject anyway. What do you think about like people that have, say, like profound supernatural experiences and things like that? Whether it's it encounters with what they call cryptids, or people might have like ghosts, like poltergeists and stuff. What are your thoughts on things like that? Do you think that this is all connected to the spirituality, the deeper levels of things that's going on when you're having these experiences with ayahuasca and things, or do you think it's separate, or maybe you don't have an opinion on it at all? I don't know, but it'd be really interesting to know your opinion on it.
Yeah, I think that, these are consciousness phenomena, and to write them off as just fake is foolish. There's a lot of fake out there, and we have to learn how to differentiate fake from fact. And consciousness phenomena is exciting because it means there's stuff outside the box. And so if you think about it in a bell curve, we chop off the ends of the bell curve, and we just think that down the box, in the middle of the box, is what's real and the other stuff isn't. But these are phenomena, and we have to study our phenomena. The phenomena is part of our human collective, and there should be a factual way to understand these things. And if we're not there yet, it just means we don't have a sophisticated enough technology to grasp it yet. And so I mean, fundamentally, I don't know what poltergeists are or why these phenomena exist, but I've experienced them. I've been around people who have these experiences, and I've watched things happen in their presence that don't happen in my own presence alone. And they go, see? And I'm like, wait, good enough. Like, I just saw something that's mind-blowing to me. I'm not going to explain it. I can easily write it off as, oh, that's a spirit, or, oh, that's a dead person, like, whatever.
I think things... No, sorry, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, and, I mean, I'll give you a quick example, a quick story of the guys in the Amazon. The guys in the Amazon use those kinds of phenomena to get each other's attention. Right. So, like, say you need to call, you have a friend in the Amazon, say you have a friend who's, days travel away, they don't have phones or anything like that. They'll call on a spirit like that to go to find them, and there's one in the jungle that they know of that whistles. And so they use like a ringtone. Right. So they send that to go to the person hears the whistle, and they check in, who's calling me, and they tap into someone else who's calling them. And I watched this over and over again, and they acted like this was normal technology, and I was like, losing my mind over this. I'm like, what is this technology? So these are phenomena, and we need to study and understand and discover what's behind the phenomena, and then we'll understand more about consciousness.
I do find things like that fascinating. It's almost just like that unknown. I mean, there's so many stories of things like cryptids, over the all across the world. I mean, in North America alone, you hear all the tales about skinwalkers and the Michigan dog man and all these things, and I just find it absolutely fascinating. I don't have like a dog in the race, so to speak. I don't know if I believe it or not, but I find it fascinating. When you hear these stories, I almost just think, I wish I was almost like there, even though I'm sure it was like terrifying at the time, just to experience it, see what my mind made of it,
Yeah, the paranormal's real. Like that part I'm 100% sure of. When I moved to the city of Iquitos, there's a block check this out, there's a block, okay, in Iquitos, there's a block where all the people who live on that block know that there is a parade from the cemetery every night. And they sit out on their porches in the city and watch the parade from the cemetery. Like, mind-blowing. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's just
what are you talking about? Like, this sounds crazy. Yet that entire, like, series of 10 blocks of the street are all like, hey, they all come out of the cemetery at night. And they act like it's totally normal. So I don't know what to make of it either. But there are places where that kind of stuff's happening. So you got to take it seriously enough to at least look at it.
Have you been following what's been happening? I think it's in US Congress, isn't it? The last couple of days with like the UFOs and aliens and stuff. Have you been following?
Yeah, I mean, lots of people send me stuff about this.
Yeah,
and I've been.
Do you think that's crazy? Yeah. I think it's.
Yeah, I mean, I want to see it all. I get really interested right? I get really interested when I think no one's like pulling the wool over my eyes. So show me, like, put the evidence out there. Show me what we really have. Stop telling stories. I don't care if you're testifying. Put it out there. Let us see it for real, and then I'll be able to differentiate: is this a psyops thing, or is this real, or what's going on with it? But to me, like, I want all the info associated with it. I want Freedom of Information Act. I want to be shown everything, and then let us make our own conclusions.
Yeah, that's one thing I'd love to talk to you more about. I said, if you are up for coming again, I said it doesn't have to be 2 hours like next time, even if it's just half an hour just to wrap up. We'd really appreciate it.
I'm happy to come even for 2 hours. I'm happy to.
Thanks very much, man. We really appreciate it.
It's been amazing.
Yeah, because as I said, I'd love to talk to you more about sort of like aliens, your thoughts on that. As I said, I know Drew really wants to get into about crypto, music, just all sorts of things. But I want to respect your time, so I'll let you get on because I know that you're a busy man. But thanks so much for coming on, Hamilton. Have you been on UK radio before, or?
First time.
Is it your first time on UK? We can lay claim to that then.
Yay.
First time on UK radio.
This goes out as a podcast, but we're also on Aspen Weight Radio at the moment. So
it goes out on DAB in the UK in lots of the southwest of England, basically, and Wales.
Amazing. First time. I love it. Can't wait to do this again. Yeah.
Yeah, bringing you to the masses of the UK, man. But thank you so much, Hamilton. I say it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. Really value your time and just taking the time to talk to us, man. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, dude.
Yeah, incredible conversation. Thank you guys so much. It's a real pleasure.
Cheers, man. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.